She has no business teaching our children. Daniel Carter's voice cracked through the packed auditorium like a judge delivering a final verdict. Applause erupted from several parents before the words had even settled. Ava Brooks did not move. The black teacher stood alone beneath the bright stage lights, a thin folder pressed gently against her side, while dozens of eyes measured her as though she had already lost. The old air conditioner hummed overhead. Folding chairs scraped against the polished floor. Somewhere in the back, someone muttered, "It is about time." Ava felt the warmth of the lights against her face, but her fingers stayed steady. She had stood through angry meetings before. She knew what contempt looked like. Daniel took another step toward the microphone, expensive leather shoes echoing sharply across the silent room. His tailored navy suit looked untouched by the summer heat that lingered inside the school gym. "Our children deserve excellence," he said, keeping his eyes locked on Ava. "Not excuses." Several heads nodded immediately. A woman folded her arms. Another parent quietly recorded everything on her phone. The principal shifted uneasily near the stage curtain but said nothing. Ava looked toward the rows of students' artwork hanging along the walls. Crayon drawings. Science fair ribbons. Graduation photos from years past. So many faces she still remembered. None of them were in this room to speak for her. "Do you have anything to say?" Daniel asked, almost smiling now. The room became painfully still. Ava stepped toward the microphone. Before she could answer, the heavy auditorium doors opened with a metallic click. Every head turned. A district courier hurried inside, slightly out of breath, holding a large cream-colored envelope stamped with an official state seal. He walked straight past the confused parents without speaking. His footsteps echoed louder than anyone expected. The principal frowned as the courier leaned close and whispered something only he could hear. The color drained from the principal's face. Without a word, he accepted the envelope, stared at the seal for a long second, then slowly walked toward Ava. Daniel frowned. "What is this?" he demanded. The principal did not answer. Instead, he carefully placed the envelope into Ava's hands. It felt heavier than paper should. Warm from the courier's grip. Every phone in the room lifted a little higher. Ava glanced down at the unfamiliar seal. She had never seen it before. Daniel laughed softly. "Go ahead," he said. "Maybe it is your resignation." A few parents chuckled with him. Ava ran one thumb beneath the edge of the envelope. The thick paper tore with a quiet rip that somehow seemed louder than the applause from moments earlier. Even the humming air conditioner suddenly felt distant. She unfolded the letter. Her eyes moved across the first line. Then stopped. The slightest change crossed her face. Not fear. Not relief. Something else. The principal looked at her, confused. "Miss Brooks?" he whispered. Ava did not answer. Daniel's confidence flickered for the first time. "Read it," someone called from the back. "Read it out loud." Ava slowly lifted her eyes from the page. They settled not on Daniel, but on a quiet boy sitting beside him. The boy swallowed hard, lowered his gaze, and gripped the edge of his chair until his knuckles turned pale. Then, almost too quietly to hear, he whispered 4 words that made the principal freeze where he stood. "She saved my life once." The whisper seemed too small to matter, yet it landed with the weight of a falling beam. Daniel Carter turned sharply toward his son. "What did you say?" The boy kept staring at the floor, his sneakers barely touching the polished hardwood. "She saved my life," he repeated, louder this time. The room shifted. Parents who had been leaning forward with confident smiles slowly exchanged uncertain glances. Even the fluorescent lights seemed harsher now, reflecting across rows of nervous faces. Daniel forced out a tight laugh. "Ethan, this is not the time." His son's jaw tightened. "No, Dad. You never listened." Ava remained perfectly still. The letter rested in her hands, unopened to everyone except her. She could hear the faint rustle of paper beneath her fingertips, and the distant buzz of the gym scoreboard that nobody had bothered to switch off after basketball practice. The principal stepped closer. Miss Brooks, he said quietly. Perhaps everyone deserves to hear it. Ava looked at the crowd instead of the letter. She recognized nearly every parent. Mothers who had thanked her during conferences. Fathers who had smiled politely in hallways before following louder voices. Faces that now refused to meet her eyes. Daniel folded his arms. One emotional story does not erase poor judgment. His words sounded firm, but something beneath them had begun to crack. Ethan stood before anyone could stop him. His chair scraped across the floor with a sharp screech that made several people flinch. When Mom was in the hospital, he said, I stopped talking. Silence answered him. I failed every class. I skipped lunch. I wanted everyone to leave me alone. His voice trembled, but he kept going. Dad hired tutors, therapists, coaches. None of them reached me. Daniel's shoulders stiffened. Sit down. No. Ethan looked directly at Ava. She never gave up. A woman in the second row slowly lowered her phone. Another parent quietly wiped at one eye before realizing anyone had noticed. The principal glanced toward Ava, then back to the audience. The atmosphere had changed so completely that even the old ventilation system seemed louder than the crowd. Ethan swallowed hard. She stayed after school every single Friday. He paused. Not because she had to. Because she knew I was sitting alone in the library pretending to read. Daniel stared at his son as though hearing another language. You told me those extra hours were math tutoring. They were, Ethan replied softly. But mostly, she just sat there until I finally started talking again. No one moved. The applause from earlier now felt impossible to imagine. Ava finally unfolded the letter another inch. The embossed seal caught the overhead lights with a faint shimmer. The principal noticed the first page and suddenly inhaled sharply. His eyes widened. That cannot be, he murmured almost to himself. Daniel turned immediately. What is it? The principal did not answer. Instead, he carefully reached for the document, his hands noticeably unsteady. He read the opening paragraph once. Then again, slower. His expression changed from confusion to disbelief. Parents leaned forward instinctively, searching his face for answers. The gym had become so quiet that someone dropping a pen near the back sounded like breaking glass. The principal looked at Ava with a mixture of respect and astonishment. Then he slowly lifted his eyes toward the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, he said barely above a whisper, before any vote is taken, there is something in this letter that every parent in this room needs to hear. The principal's hands trembled just enough for the paper to rustle through the silent gym. Every phone camera tilted higher. The tiny red recording lights reflected across polished trophies inside the glass display case behind the stage. Daniel Carter stepped forward, his expensive watch catching the fluorescent lights. Read it, he said sharply. If it changes anything, let everyone hear it. Ava did not move. She could feel dozens of eyes pressing against her, waiting for either redemption or collapse. The principal swallowed once before speaking. This letter is from the State Department of Education. A ripple spread through the audience. Parents exchanged confused looks. Someone whispered, State? Another voice answered, That cannot be good. Daniel forced a smile that looked thinner than before. Recognition does not erase complaints. His confidence sounded rehearsed now. The principal continued reading. After a year-long review involving academic performance, student intervention records, and anonymous family testimonials. His voice suddenly slowed. Miss Ava Brooks has been unanimously selected for the highest educational honor in the state. The room froze. Not a single chair moved. Even the old ventilation fan seemed to stop humming. Daniel blinked once, then laughed quietly. There has to be a mistake. Nobody joined him. The principal looked down again. Her classroom produced the largest improvement in graduation rates among all public schools in the district. More whispers. 98% of at-risk students remained enrolled. Another pause. 17 students who had previously been identified as likely dropouts graduated on time. A mother covered her mouth. A father slowly lowered his folded arms. Daniel looked toward the school board members, searching for someone to challenge the letter. None of them moved. Ava remained silent, her posture unchanged. She had imagined this moment many times over the years, yet it felt strangely empty. Recognition could not erase the afternoons she spent wondering whether she still belonged in the classroom. Ethan suddenly reached into his backpack. "There is something else." His voice shook harder now. He pulled out a faded composition notebook with worn corners and held it above his head. "Miss Brooks gave this to me." Daniel frowned. "What is that?" Ethan carefully opened the notebook. Between pages of algebra problems and reading assignments were handwritten notes in blue ink. Tiny messages filled the margins. "You matter. One difficult day does not decide your future. I believe you even when you cannot believe yourself." Several parents leaned closer without realizing it. Ethan turned another page. Then another. Every week. Every month. Every note written in the same careful handwriting. His breathing caught. "I never showed these to anyone." Ava quietly looked away. The gym lights reflected across the glossy cover of the notebook as Ethan reached the final page. Taped inside was a folded hospital visitor badge from 2 years earlier. Daniel stared at it in confusion. "Why do you have that?" Ethan slowly unfolded the badge. "Because she came to see me." Daniel's face tightened. "When?" Ethan looked directly at his father. "The night you told the nurses you were too busy to stay because of the merger meeting in Chicago." The words struck harder than any accusation. Daniel's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Parents stopped looking at Ava. Every eye turned toward him instead. His breathing became shallow. He searched his memory, desperately trying to remember that week. The hospital hallway. The delayed flight. The unanswered phone call. Then something surfaced. A nurse had mentioned that Ethan had smiled for the first time in days after receiving an unexpected visitor. Daniel had never asked who it was. He had assumed it was family. Slowly, almost unwillingly, his eyes drifted back toward Ava. She still held the unopened second page of the official letter in her hands. The principal noticed it too. His expression changed once again. He looked at Ava, then at the audience, his voice barely steady. "Everything I have read so far is only the introduction. The next page explains why the governor personally signed this letter." The principal stared at the second page as though it had suddenly become too heavy to hold. His thumb tightened against the embossed seal, the paper trembling beneath the cold fluorescent lights. Every phone in the room remained pointed toward the stage. Tiny recording lights blinked red across the audience like silent witnesses. Daniel Carter stepped closer, his polished shoes striking the hardwood with controlled urgency. "Read it," he demanded, but the confidence in his voice had thinned into impatience. The principal drew a slow breath. "This recommendation was signed personally by the governor after reviewing evidence that Miss Brooks prevented multiple student tragedies through early intervention that school evaluations failed to detect." A wave of whispers swept through the gym. Daniel frowned. "Tragedies?" Ava lowered her eyes. She already knew which stories the letter contained. Stories she had never shared. The principal continued. "Her classroom observations led counselors to intervene before 3 separate student mental health crises. Her reports were initially questioned because there appeared to be no visible warning signs." A mother slowly covered her mouth. Another parent looked toward her teenage daughter sitting beside her and quietly reached for her hand. Daniel folded his arms tighter. "Teachers are not psychologists." His words echoed through the room, but they no longer carried the same authority. The principal looked up from the page. "Neither were the administrators who dismissed her concerns." Silence crashed over the audience. Ava felt dozens of eyes studying her differently now, not with admiration, but with disbelief. How could a classroom teacher have seen what licensed specialists had missed? Daniel shook his head. "Coincidence." His voice came faster now. "Good timing. Lucky guesses?" Ethan looked at his father in disbelief. "You still do not get it." The gym doors creaked softly as two late arriving district officials slipped inside. Neither interrupted. They simply stood along the back wall, listening. The principal continued reading. One case involved a student whose behavior had been rated as normal by multiple assessments. He paused again. Miss Brooks noticed only one change. The student stopped sharpening the same pencil every morning. Confused murmurs rippled through the audience. Ava finally spoke, her voice calm enough to cut through every whisper. He always sharpened it before class because his grandfather had given it to him. No one interrupted. One Monday he walked in carrying it, but he never sharpened it. He never looked at it once. Daniel blinked. That means nothing. Ava looked toward him without anger. It meant everything. The principal glanced back at the letter. When questioned privately, the student admitted his grandfather had passed away over the weekend and that he had already written goodbye letters. A gasp spread across the room. Several parents instinctively turned toward their own children. One school board member slowly removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. Daniel remained frozen. Sweat gathered beneath his collar despite the cool air flowing from the ceiling vents. His reputation had always rested on certainty. Facts. Numbers. Winning every argument. Yet every sentence pulled another brick from beneath him. He tried again. Anyone could claim that afterward. The principal slowly lowered the letter. There is documentation. He nodded toward the district officials standing quietly near the exit. Signed statements. Hospital records. Counselor reports. Every detail verified. Daniel's breathing became shallow. For the first time that evening, nobody looked to him for the next answer. Every face had turned toward Ava instead. She still stood exactly where she had been at the beginning of the meeting, shoulders relaxed, hands steady, saying nothing she could not prove. One of the district officials finally stepped forward. The metallic buckle on his briefcase reflected the harsh overhead lights as he placed it carefully on the principal's table. The steel latches clicked open inside the silent gym. Thick folders filled with official seals rested inside. He removed only one. The label across the front made the principal's face lose every trace of color. He looked slowly toward Ava, then toward Daniel, before whispering words that instantly emptied the room of every remaining sound. This file was supposed to stay sealed for another 10 years. The district official did not open the sealed file. He held it against his chest as though even touching it carried consequences. Every phone camera in the gym shifted toward him. The tiny recording lights flickered across the polished floor while the ventilation system hummed overhead with a dull mechanical rhythm that suddenly felt far too loud. Daniel Carter took another step forward. "Open it," he ordered. "If my family is being accused of something, then everyone deserves the truth." His voice echoed confidently, but the muscles along his jaw refused to relax. The official met his eyes. "This file is not about accusing anyone." He paused. "It is about explaining why Miss Brooks was instructed never to discuss one particular student in public." A wave of uneasy whispers rolled through the audience. Ava lowered her gaze. Her fingertips tightened around the edge of the letter for the first time all evening. Ethan looked from the official to Ava, confused. "What student?" Nobody answered immediately. The principal slowly accepted the sealed file, broke the security strip, and carefully unfolded the first document. His expression changed before he reached the second paragraph. He inhaled sharply. "Miss Brooks," he whispered, "you never told us." Ava's voice remained quiet. "Because I signed an agreement." Daniel frowned. "An agreement with who?" The district official answered before she could. "With the family." Silence fell so completely that the faint buzzing from a malfunctioning fluorescent light near the back wall became impossible to ignore. Parents leaned forward. Chairs creaked. A child coughed somewhere near the entrance before being gently hushed. Daniel folded his arms tighter. "Whose family?" The principal swallowed hard. "Yours." Daniel blinked. "That is impossible." The official nodded toward Ethan. 3 years ago, after your wife became critically ill, Your son entered what doctors described as severe emotional withdrawal. Multiple specialists evaluated him. He looked directly at Daniel. Most believed he would recover with time. Another page turned. The sound of paper seemed deafening inside the silent gym. Miss Brooks disagreed. Ava closed her eyes for only a second, remembering the frightened boy who spent entire afternoons pretending to solve worksheets just so he would not have to go home to an empty bedroom. Daniel's breathing grew uneven. She was his teacher. No, the official corrected gently. She became his advocate. More parents slowly lowered their phones. Recording no longer felt important. Listening did. The principal continued reading. Miss Brooks repeatedly warned that Ethan was not withdrawing because of grief alone. She believed he had quietly accepted the idea that his father blamed him for distracting the family during a critical business merger. Daniel's face drained of color. That is absurd. His words came too quickly. Too loudly. Ethan stared at his father without blinking. You told Uncle Ryan that if things had been quieter at home, you could have saved the deal. Daniel froze. The memory struck him like cold water. He had spoken those words late one night outside the intensive care unit, believing Ethan was asleep behind the hospital room door. He had never known anyone else heard them. Ethan's voice cracked. I thought you meant me. A mother in the front row quietly began to cry. Another father removed his glasses and looked away. Daniel reached instinctively toward his son. Ethan stepped back. Just one step. It felt farther than 1,000 miles. Ava never moved. She remembered sitting beside Ethan in the library every Friday, never forcing conversation, simply waiting until silence no longer frightened him. Daniel's shoulders sagged beneath the weight of every eye in the room. His certainty, his authority, his carefully built reputation dissolved without anyone raising a voice against him. The principal looked back toward the final pages of the file. There is one more statement, he said softly. It explains why Miss Brooks refused every promotion she was offered after this case ended. Ava looked up immediately. Please, she whispered. It was the first time all evening that emotion reached her voice. Do not read that part. The principal stared at her, then slowly at the page already resting in his hands. His expression shifted from sympathy to disbelief. I do not think, he said almost under his breath, that this decision belongs to us anymore. No one reached for the microphone. The principal's words seemed to linger beneath the cold fluorescent lights long after they were spoken. The gym had become unnaturally still. The faint hum of the ventilation system faded into the background, replaced by the quiet vibration of a phone forgotten on silent inside someone's purse. Ava Brooks remained motionless at the center of the stage. Her hands rested lightly around the folded letter. She was no longer defending herself. She looked like someone carrying a burden that had become too familiar to put down. Daniel Carter could not take his eyes off her. His breathing had slowed, but every breath felt heavier than the last. For years he had believed confidence sounded loud. Now the quiet frightened him more than any accusation. Ethan stood between them, uncertain whether to move toward his father or his teacher. His fingers tightened around the worn notebook until the paper bent beneath his grip. The principal looked at Ava again. You asked us not to read the final statement. His voice was almost a whisper now. Why? Ava answered without hesitation. Because it was never written to protect me. A ripple of confusion passed through the audience. Several parents lowered their phones completely. Nobody seemed interested in recording anymore. They simply watched. Ava slowly looked toward Ethan. Some stories belong to the people who survived them. Daniel swallowed hard. If there is something I need to know. His voice faltered before he finished the sentence. Ava met his eyes for the first time that evening. There was no anger there. No satisfaction. Only exhaustion. There was always something you needed to know. The words landed softly, yet Daniel lowered his gaze as though they had struck him. The district official quietly stepped beside the principal. Miss Brooks never requested recognition, he said. In fact, she tried to decline every award connected to this case. Murmurs returned, but they were different now. No longer suspicious. Curious. Respectful. A mother near the front slowly whispered, "Why would anyone do that?" The official opened a thin folder separate from the sealed file. Inside rested copies of signed letters. Recommendation after recommendation. Promotion offers. Leadership appointments. Each one politely declined. The dates stretched back nearly 3 years. The principal turned another page. Assistant principal. Another page. District Student Wellness Director. Another. State Educational Advisory Board. Every offer carried the same handwritten response beneath the signature line. Thank you. My students still need a teacher more than they need another administrator. The room fell silent again. Daniel stared at the handwriting. He had spent months organizing petitions demanding that this woman leave the classroom. She had quietly refused positions that paid more than twice his annual salary simply to remain with children everyone else overlooked. His shoulders lowered almost imperceptibly. Across the room, a father who had signed Daniel's petition folded the printed copy in his lap and slipped it beneath his chair. Others noticed. One by one, papers disappeared into purses, briefcases, jacket pockets. No one spoke about it. They simply stopped holding on to them. Ava barely noticed. Her attention remained on Ethan. "You still keep the notebook?" she said gently. Ethan nodded. "I read it whenever things get loud." Ava smiled for the first time all evening. It was small. Tired. Genuine. Several parents looked away, suddenly unable to hold her gaze. Daniel felt something inside him collapse with unbearable quiet. Every certainty that had carried him into the meeting now felt painfully small. He opened his mouth, searching for words that refused to come. Before anyone could speak again, the district official reached into the sealed file one last time. His fingers carefully removed a single white envelope that had remained hidden beneath every other document. Unlike the rest, it carried no government seal. Only one line had been written across the front in careful blue ink. The principal stared at it, then slowly looked toward Ava. Even she had gone pale. The handwriting belonged to Ethan. The envelope had never been opened. The unopened envelope seemed to pull every breath out of the room. No one shifted in their seat. No one whispered. Even the old ventilation fans overhead faded beneath the crushing silence. The principal held the envelope with both hands, staring at Ethan's careful handwriting as though he were afraid the ink itself might disappear. Daniel Carter looked at his son, then at Ava. "What is it?" he asked quietly. Ethan's face turned pale. I forgot about that." Ava closed her eyes for a brief moment. "You were never supposed to see it again." The district official glanced toward her. "You knew this letter still existed?" She nodded once. "I thought it had been destroyed after counseling ended." The principal carefully opened the envelope. The paper inside had yellowed slightly with time, its edges softened from years of being folded. He unfolded it slowly. The faint crackle echoed through the gymnasium. His eyes moved across the first paragraph. Then stopped. His lips parted, but no words came out. Daniel took one nervous step forward. "Please, just read it." The principal swallowed hard before beginning. "Dear Miss Brooks." His voice trembled. "If something ever happens to me, please do not tell my dad that I blamed him." The room froze. Ethan lowered his head. Daniel stood completely still. He already feels sad enough. The principal's voice grew quieter with every sentence. "I know he loves me. He just forgot how to show it after Mom got sick." A mother in the second row quietly began to cry. Someone lowered a phone until it rested against their chest. Nobody wanted to interrupt the words of a frightened child. The principal continued. "Please tell him not to miss my baseball games anymore, because I always look for him before every inning." Daniel's breathing caught. The memory crashed into him with painful clarity. Empty bleachers. Missed Saturdays. Endless business flights. Ethan looked at the floor, unable to watch his father's face. "If he ever smiles again," The principal read softly. Please do not tell him this letter exists. I want him to think I got better because of him. The final sentence barely rose above a whisper. He needs hope more than I do. Silence swallowed the room. No applause. No whispers. Only the quiet hum of the lights reflecting across the polished hardwood floor. Daniel's shoulders collapsed. Every carefully built wall inside him seemed to give way at once. He looked toward Ava, his eyes filled not with anger, but with disbelief. You kept this from me? Ava answered gently. Because he begged me to. Daniel stared at her, unable to speak. Every counseling team wanted you to read it. Ava continued. Every specialist believed the truth would force healing. She paused. I believed it would only give you another reason to carry guilt. The district official nodded slowly. Miss Brooks was the only professional who opposed releasing the letter. Several school board members exchanged stunned glances. One quietly whispered, She was right. Ava looked toward Ethan. Healing built on shame never lasts. Her voice remained calm. He needed his father back. Not another apology. Daniel's eyes filled. For the first time all evening, he did not care who was watching. He turned toward his son with trembling hands. Ethan hesitated only for a second before taking one slow step closer. The distance between them had almost disappeared. Around the gym, parents who had demanded Ava's removal slowly lowered their heads. The petitions hidden beneath chairs suddenly felt unbearably heavy. Nobody defended them anymore. Nobody defended Daniel either. They simply watched the woman they had tried to humiliate become the quiet center holding the entire room together. The principal carefully folded Ethan's letter and returned it to the envelope. Then he looked toward the district official, whose expression had become unexpectedly serious. Without a word, the official reached into his briefcase one final time and removed a navy blue folder marked confidential. He placed it beside the envelope and looked directly at Ava. Miss Brooks, he said quietly, there is one decision you made that even the governor questioned. And before this night ends, everyone here deserves to know why you almost resigned the morning after saving Ethan. The navy blue folder rested on the table untouched. No one reached for it. No one wanted to be the first to disturb the fragile silence that had settled over the gym. The fluorescent lights reflected softly across tear-filled eyes instead of angry faces. Phones were still recording, but forgotten now, hanging loosely in trembling hands. Daniel Carter slowly stepped away from the microphone. The polished hardwood creaked beneath each measured step. Every person in the room instinctively made space as he crossed toward Ava. For the first time that evening, he looked smaller than the woman everyone had tried to remove. He stopped only a few feet from her. His voice barely carried across the silent room. I thought I was protecting my son. Ava nodded gently. I know. Daniel looked down at the folded notebook Ethan still held against his chest. But I never asked what he needed. Ethan quietly walked forward. Without a word, he placed the worn notebook into his father's hands. Daniel opened it slowly. Every page carried Ava's careful handwriting. Encouragement. Quiet reminders. Tiny victories celebrated in blue ink. None of them mentioned awards. None mentioned sacrifice. Every sentence pointed back to Ethan. Daniel closed the notebook again, his hands shaking too much to hold it steady. You spent years helping my family, he whispered, while I spent months trying to destroy your career. Ava never answered that accusation. Instead, she glanced toward Ethan. He did the hard part. Ethan looked confused. Ava smiled gently. He chose to trust people again. The words settled over the room like warm light after a storm. One by one, parents who had avoided Ava's eyes now looked directly at her. Not because she had defeated anyone. Because they suddenly understood what strength had looked like all along. A mother rose quietly from the third row. She folded the petition she had signed and walked toward the stage. Without speaking, she placed it on the principal's table. Then she whispered, I am sorry. Another parent stood. Then another. Soon a quiet line formed down the center aisle. One after another, Signatures calling for Ava's dismissal disappeared onto the table. No speeches. No excuses. Just folded paper and lowered heads. The sound of footsteps across the hardwood echoed gently through the gym. The principal watched in silence, unable to hide the emotion in his face. The district official slowly closed the confidential folder without opening it. "Perhaps," he said softly, "this is no longer the most important document in the room." Nobody disagreed. Daniel looked around at the parents who had once stood beside him. Not one remained in their seat. They had all crossed the room for the same reason. He turned back toward Ava, struggling to find words worthy of the moment. "I cannot undo what I said." Ava met his eyes with the same calm dignity she had carried since the meeting began. "No," she replied softly. "But your son is still listening to what you say next." Daniel's eyes filled again. He turned toward Ethan. The boy hesitated only briefly before stepping into his father's embrace. Either of them spoke. They did not need to. Around them, several parents quietly wiped away tears. Even the principal looked toward the floor, giving them privacy inside a room filled with witnesses. Ava slowly gathered the state letter and Ethan's envelope, holding them carefully against her chest. She never looked victorious. She looked relieved that a family had finally begun to heal. The district official watched her for a long moment before speaking again. "Miss Brooks," he said quietly, "there is still one question left unanswered." Ava's peaceful expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "I know." He glanced toward the unopened Navy folder. "Tomorrow morning, the governor expects your decision." Daniel frowned. "Decision?" The official nodded. "Whether she remains a classroom teacher, or accepts the one position in public education that only she can fill." The entire room turned back toward Ava. She looked at the children sitting quietly in the front row, then at the classroom keys still hanging from the lanyard in her hand. For the first time that evening, she did not seem certain what the right answer would be. The room remained silent long after the district official asked his question. Nobody rushed Ava. Nobody expected an answer anymore. The fluorescent lights cast a pale glow across the polished floor, their reflection stretching beneath her shoes like a path she had never planned to walk. Somewhere near the back of the gym, a phone screen slowly went dark as someone stopped recording. The moment no longer belonged to the internet. It belonged to the people standing inside it. Ava looked down at the classroom keys resting against her palm. The worn metal edges had lost their shine years ago. Every scratch carried another ordinary morning. Another student greeted at the door. Another chance to tell a frightened child they mattered. She closed her fingers around the keys before looking toward the district official. "Please thank the governor for believing in me," she said quietly. "But I already have the job I prayed for." No one moved. The words settled gently across the room, stronger than applause could ever be. The official studied her for a long moment, then smiled with quiet understanding. He closed the Navy folder and slid it back into his briefcase without another argument. "I had a feeling you would say that," he replied. Daniel Carter watched the folder disappear. Just hours earlier he had believed success was measured by promotions, influence, and recognition. Standing there now, he realized the woman he had tried to remove had quietly turned down everything he spent his life chasing. Ethan walked over to Ava one last time. He carefully removed the faded visitor badge from inside his notebook and held it out to her. "You kept me alive," he whispered. Ava gently folded his fingers back around it. "No," she said with a warm smile. "You decided to stay. I was only lucky enough to witness it." Ethan nodded slowly, understanding more than his years should have allowed. Daniel stepped closer. This time there was no microphone between them. No audience to persuade. No reputation left to defend. He extended his hand, then hesitated. Ava looked at it for a brief second before taking it. His voice broke almost immediately. "I judged your skin before I ever saw your heart," Ava answered softly. "Then make sure your son never learns to do the same." Daniel lowered his head. "He will not." Around them, parents quietly applauded. Not loudly. Not all at once. It began with one pair of hands. Then another. Soon the gentle sound filled the gym without anyone standing or cheering. It felt less like celebration and more like gratitude. The principal wiped his eyes before walking toward the stage doors. As Ava followed, children waiting in the hallway spotted her through the glass. One little girl ran forward holding a folded spelling test covered in bright red stars. "Miss Brooks!" she called with a smile that reached her eyes. Ava knelt beside her as naturally as if nothing extraordinary had happened inside the gym. "You got every word," Ava said proudly. The little girl nodded. "Because you said I could?" Ava smiled. "I knew you could before you did." Morning sunlight spilled through the hallway windows, washing away the cold glow of the fluorescent lights behind them. The applause inside the gym faded into a distant echo. Daniel remained standing in the doorway, watching Ava disappear into the stream of children who reached for her hand without hesitation. Nobody asked who held the most power anymore. The answer was already walking down the hallway with a ring of worn classroom keys, surrounded by students who believed they mattered because one quiet teacher had believed it first. And as the doors slowly closed behind her, the loudest sound left in the building was the silence of people who finally understood they had been standing in the presence of greatness all along.